have Ms. Ichiko here today. She is the executive advisor of Survivors Against Forced Exit, the advisory board representative on human rights and women's dignity for the Women's Federation for World Peace, and the director of the Religious Liberty Committee. So she's going to tell us a bit about the current situation in Japan.
Hello, thank you everyone for that wonderful introduction. I was actually going to introduce myself as the host of a radio show, which is the other thing that I do. So I'll start there, but I also include everything that you said, so keep that in mind. So hi, my name is Ichiko Sudo. I'm the host of the My Moment of Courage with Ichiko Sudo radio show. It's on WHBW Hyde Park in New York. I consider it my mission to give voice to survivors of human rights abuse and other types of abuse. Primarily I focus on women's issues, but obviously men are also welcome. I interview survivors on my show, survivors of human rights violations, domestic violence, sex trafficking, incest, pedophilia. These are all very heavy topics, by the way. Suicide, natural disaster, and faith breaking. My show gives courage to survivors around the world. But today I'm here to talk about faith breaking of members of the Unification Church in Japan. And I just want to start out with what is faith breaking, because most people have never heard of this before. Essentially, if you boil it down to the very, very basics, it's one person telling another person, I do not agree with what you believe in, and I'm going to force you to change your mind. That's what it boils down to, sort of in my very layman's terms. So thousands of young Japanese college students and young people in their 20s, mostly women, are being kidnapped and held against their will in private prisons in Japan for months and years. And during their confinements, they're abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, some cases starved, tortured, and even raped in order to change their religion. And unbelievably, like you've been hearing, it's their parents who are committing these illegal acts. Here are some pictures of recent victims. You'll notice that they're mostly women, and they're mostly in their 20s. Crowbars, stun guns, chains are used during these abductions. These are not kind when we have a little conversation. I mean, these are physically brutal in some cases when they start to use things like crowbars. This is a typical locking device. This is actually a real lock that someone had taken with them back from their location of confinement. So this one's real. But if you listen to, and I've interviewed many survivors, a lot of them talk about these kinds of contraptions as well as lots of chains and locks. Like Mr. Sumitomo said, there were 7 locks on the front door of that location. So there's no way out of that. This is that same lock. So it's made so you can't turn the actual, the doorknob. This is a confinement building. It's a typical confinement building. It's not like this one little unrelated incident and someone found a little location and that's where they put them. It's organized. I mean, there's someone being held here, there's someone being held here, there's someone being held here. So when you see that there's buildings with multiple locations where people are being confined, young college students or young people in their 20s are being held, this isn't just sort of a one-off situation. This is organized. But even after release, many survivors suffer from depression and PTSD. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is what the military comes back with after they've been through war. It can be debilitating. I'm going to talk about a few young people's stories. Reiko Kajino was a university student. She probably looked just like you, and if she was sitting among you, you wouldn't be able to tell her apart. One day, her father invited her to dinner at their family home. When she got there, 4 people ambushed her, forced her into a taxi, and took her to a place that had been prepared for her confinement. For 36 days, they held her there while a professional faith breaker who had been retained by her parents sought to break her, barraging her, harassing her, humiliating her. Afterwards, she was moved to the faith breaker's apartment, and in the evening, while she was taking a bath with the door locked, the faith breaker opened the door with a duplicate key and assaulted her, and for the next 65 days she was raped so many times she could not count. She essentially became his sex slave, and at one point he even shaved her pubic hair. Out of desperation, she finally managed to escape, and when her father learned the truth of what happened to her, he hung himself. Reiko Kajino, by the way, is a pseudonym. She is not public about this. Mr. Torugoto, this is the man who I have a picture of, had just graduated Nihon University with a degree in architecture when he was kidnapped and confined by his family. He refused to give up his beliefs, and as a result, they wouldn't let him out, and he stayed there for 12 years, primarily in a room the size of a closet. So, an 8x8 room is only a little bit bigger than this screen. Imagine spending even one day in a room a little bit bigger than this screen. This man spent 12 years. 12 years is a long, long time. When his family gave up on trying to break him, they threw him out of the building barefoot and threw his shoes out after him. When he got out, and I heard this from a friend who met him shortly after he got out, that she had a digital camera with her, and he said, "What's that?" Because you know what, 12 years before, there was no such thing as a digital camera, let alone the internet or an iPhone. Like, he didn't know what they were. That's hard to believe in today's age, that there's someone who'd never seen that. He had lost a decade of his life in a private prison, essentially, being tortured, beat, humiliated, and starved. This is what he looked like when he got out. So right after he got out, he was hospitalized for, a month or so? And he had lost most of his body weight. Yet the Japanese court refused to prosecute his perpetrators. I don't think they arrested anybody, and they never got a search warrant, and they never went to look for evidence. He is now in the middle of a civil trial. And by the way, the parents have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to these faith breakers for their services. Mr. Goto's parents spent well over $1 million trying to break him. I don't remember the exact number. I think it was somewhere between 1.4 and 1.7. That's a lot of money. And so there's a money-making aspect to this as well for those people who are in the business of faith breaking. And I speak to survivors of many types of abuse, and I'd like to say what makes faith breaking especially heinous is that it forces parents to violate their children's belief that they can trust their parents. When something really horrible happens, something really, really bad happens, who do you turn to and who do you call? Who is your last line? The people that are gonna get you out of this situation. It's your parents. Your parents are who you reach out to, and but what if it's your parents who are the perpetrators? What does that do to you on the inside? So why do parents commit these illegal acts of violence against their children? I believe that, like in all domestic violence, it has a lot to do with control. Parents may want their children to maintain the family religion. In Japan, there's a belief that the children must continue to do certain rites so that the parents and the grandparents after their death will have good things happen to them in the afterlife. Some parents don't want their children marrying outside of their nationality. God forbid their son-in-law be American, such as Miss Antal over here. Her husband was American, and he came to Japan going crazy looking for her, and they tried to break them up. It was not acceptable to them. But a big factor in parents' decision to actually do this, to kidnap their own children, is that they are solicited by professional deprogrammers who convince them that since their child has joined this minority religion, the Unification Church, which comes from Korea, which is, a very bad country according to many Japanese, or not bad, but, they look down on many Koreans. And since they've joined this church, they will now become criminals, be sold into the sex trade, and disappear from their lives altogether. And if you thought your child was really in this kind of danger, what parent would not do everything possible to get their child out? I personally can really understand that. If you think your child is in danger, you do what you need you do what you need. And as a mother of three, I do what I can and what I need to do for my kids. So understand that. But the problem is, kidnapping and confinement is illegal. It's a violation of one's basic human rights. And there are many people whose opinions I do not agree with, and I'm sure you have the same situation. But just because I do not agree with you and your beliefs are inconvenient or embarrassing for me, I am not allowed to conduct physical, emotional, and psychological torture on you in order to make you more agreeable to me, even if you are my adult child. The sad part of all of this is that many parents learn too late that it is not the way to go. And because the Japanese government, police, and courts consider this a family matter, the problem continues. In fact, in Japan, until 2001, it was legal to beat your wife. There were no legal remedies for domestic violence until 10 years ago. And they're basically saying the same thing about this. It's a family matter. We're not touching it. As one survivor put it, my parents hired professional deprogrammers who destroyed my spirit when they could have just come to me to talk. Thank you very much.